Hi, everybody. Before you go in and take the AP exam this year, I thought it'd be good for you to just review FRQing just a little bit. I'm going to take you through the 2016 free response packet that was given to students last year. So first of all, the first thing I want you to do when this gets handed out to you and they say go is take a deep breath. And then I want you to page through and you'll see that there are four questions. I'm going to pause on each of them so you can pause the YouTube if you want to dig a little deeper into some of these questions. But what I'd love for you to do is read all four and just kind of rate them. Which one do you feel best about? To which one are you kind of scared of a little bit? And you answer the one you feel good about first, and then the second most, the third most, and then finally that one you're scared of. Why spend more time on the one that you're probably not going to do as well on? And then I want you to take another deep breath, and I want you to think about the fact that your goal is to get half of the FRQ points to pass the AP exam. You do not need to get all the points correct. There can be a part of a question that you completely bomb, and you can make up for it in other places. So let's take a look at a couple specific parts of a question. And I want to look at this chart and graph because you guys know as very smart students, whenever you see a chart or graph, you don't dive right into what the data is saying right away. You have to go piece by piece. And the first thing you do is always look at the title. The second thing you always look at is the axes. And here's where we have a little combo that tripped a lot of students up last year. The title of the chart is United States Population by Select Demographic Characteristics, but it's not population as in just total numbers of white people or Hispanic people or Asian people or black people. It is the percentage of the population that those groups occur. This is a test that is saying, can you read a chart or a graph? And you don't want to get something wrong because you didn't take the time to read the axes. We're doing every 20 years or so, we have years across the bottom. And then we have our legend or our key, which shows us what the colored bars stand for. So question 2 is, the United States is experiencing a dramatic change in the makeup of its population. These changes have political consequences for political institutions. Part A, identify, low hurdle verb. We don't need to write a lot, but what we need to write needs to be in context. We need to have at least one complete sentence. Identify a trend depicted in the chart. Trend, change over time. If I kind of fuzz my eyes and just look at this graph a little bit, I see two things that pop out at me. The most obvious thing for me on the chart is that the non-Hispanic white bar is getting shorter throughout the duration of the chart. Okay, it's not a time for you to come up with this super clever, unique trend. That one is just boom, right there in front of us. The second one that you might want to play with is the fact that the darker gray bar here, which is the Hispanic population, starts off with being about 7% of the United States population and raises all the way up to around 30% of the population. I'd pick one of those two. And your answer would simply be, a trend depicted in the chart is that the Hispanic population has increased from 1980 until 2015 as a percentage of the population. If you would just say the population of Hispanics has increased over time from 1980 to 2050, they wouldn't give you credit because this chart is organized by percentage. Don't miss the easy ones. So I'm going to skip down here and let's look at question 3 a little bit. They'll give you a tablet and at the top will tell you where to answer each question. So now we're going to flip over to the place where we're supposed to answer question 3. And the question reads, the public policy process involves interactions between Congress and the bureaucracy. Just a little reminder, policy means decisions made by the government. That could be laws, it could be rules, it could be a court decision, but any official government decision is policy. Part A, identify, low hurdle, the primary role of Congress in the policy process. Okay, if we know, remember our civics, this is almost a gimme. The primary role of Congress in the policy process is to write laws. Congress is the legislative branch, and they write legislation. Period. Done. Now, I want you to be zen and leave a couple blanks, at least maybe 3 blanks between where you wrote A and then where you start writing B. B starts with explain verb. Explain how divided party control of Congress can make the policy process difficult. When they sneak in kind of a vocab term like divided party control of Congress, I like to kind of define that before I get into my answer. And so let's try that. But remember, we're doing an explain question, so we need to go beyond just defining this. Divided party control of Congress means that the House is controlled by one party and the Senate is controlled by the other. This can make policy process difficult because a bill that is started by by the House is shot down by the Senate. And vice versa, a bill started by the Senate will be shot down by the House because they're controlled by different parties and we live in an increased polarized. Remember, that means that the Democrats become more Democratic and the Republicans become more Republican, and they're not willing to work with each other. Now I'm going to use an explain word here because we struggle a little bit with sometimes writing enough. A great explain word is the word therefore. So after we say these things, we say, therefore, this is the way to get back to the question. When the Democrats and Republicans are unwilling to work with each other, they can't make laws, and laws are policy, and therefore the process is difficult. Using a word like therefore and explain encourages you to write that extra sentence. Once again, leave a few spaces. Identify, low hurdle, the primary role of the bureaucracy in the policy process. Once again, the answer here, the primary role of the bureaucracy, which are the government agencies and departments, are to implement the law. Done, period. Multiple spaces again to be zen, and then we're back up to an explain level verb. Explain how one of the following increases the power of the bureaucracy in the policy process. Here's where you take a pause and you look at these two things. Do you know what rulemaking is? And do you know what bureaucratic discretion is? Real quick, rulemaking, the idea is that Congress passes a vague law like we want clean air, but who actually makes the rules about what clean air looks like? That's the EPA. So they make the rules of like how many parts per billion of this chemical you can have in the air. Bureaucratic discretion is the head of a bureaucracy has discretion or choice on whether or not something should be enforced harshly or in a little bit more of a lax manner. So let's give one potential answer here using rulemaking. Explain how one of the following, and we're going to use a tactic here where you rewrite the question. Explain how rulemaking increases the power of the bureaucracy in the policy process. The bureaucracy can become more powerful in making policy because Congress passes vague legislation, like we want clean air. They pass it or punt it, as we said in class, to the EPA, and the EPA then gets to make all the specific regulations about this many parts per billion of this and this many parts per billion of that can be in our air, and it still can be counted as clean. And if it's not clean, the EPA then makes rules about what the punishments are for not having clean air. When you make rules, you are creating policy. When you make more and more rules, you have more power in the policy process. I think that'd be an exceptional answer in Part D. Leave 4 spaces. And then back down here, let's look at E yet together. Explain how each, Ooh, see the trick they played here? Here it was one, and now we have to do both. Of the following enables Congress to limit the power of the bureaucracy. So part D was all about how the bureaucracy is getting powerful. Part E is about how we're going to check and balance it and kind of rein it in. Now, here's what students have done in the past. They see words here and they define them and they move on. Remember, let's reword the question. Explain how oversight hearings enables Congress to limit the power of the bureaucracy. Oversight hearings are when a congressional committee calls in a member of the bureaucracy to account for how they spent Congress's money, for the decisions that they made. And when you're doing explains, everybody, a great way is to bring in an example in. For example, when the government's Obamacare website was a complete disaster, they called in the head of HHS, the Health and Human Services Cabinet Agency, and they questioned and they put a spotlight on her and they held her accountable for the way that this money was being spent or misspent and how come they couldn't get this website up and running. Now, I'm supposed to explain how a hearing like that could limit the power of the bureaucracy. Now, all eyes are on the bureaucracy. People who didn't know that the website was a problem now know. They're held to greater accountability because there's greater scrutiny of what they're doing. And sometimes even what the Congress will do is they will audit how that money's being spent, and they might even have kind of some financial penalties in the next budget year, which will lead into our next answer. Let's go reword the question again for the last little bit. Explain how the power of the purse enables Congress to limit the power of the bureaucracy. The power of the purse is the ability of Congress to create the budget and to pass the budget. So if they don't like the job that Health and Human Services or the EPA is doing, they cut their funding. And that's a message that if you don't have money, then you can't make as many rules. And if you are using too much bureaucratic discretion and you're trying to become too powerful, you don't have the money to make those decisions anymore. And without money, you don't have as many choices, meaning you have less power. So just to wrap things up, we looked at the rules about how to make good decisions when you're reading charts, and always quote the chart, prove that you can read it. We also talked about how to be Zen and include space. We talked about how to reword questions by putting these little items here inside the question to make sure we're completing it. To help write enough in explains, we talked about the power of including that word therefore and encouraging it makes you write one more sentence. And the power of using examples to help you earn both explain and describe level verbs. Thanks for listening. Be Zen in your FRQs and you'll do great. Hopkins students write great FRQs comparatively and our scores climb because of it. You'll be part of that success. Thanks for listening.